Today is Friday, so that means this is Friday Live at 5. It's great to have you here. As soon as you come in, and if you don't mind, just check in the chat bar so I know who's here, who I'm talking with. Today we're going to be talking about forgiveness and how forgiveness can heal your life. And a lot of people, understandably, I've been this way in the past, find this extremely difficult to do. I have found in the 16 years of working one-on-one with my clients that every successful healing road ends in some type of forgiveness. And when that happens, when it happens in an organic fashion, when it happens in an emotional way, it really transforms the lives of the people that are engaging in that. And it's not something that you have to do face-to-face, person-to-person, on the phone, email, text, or whatever, with the people involved in this whole forgiveness process, the people who've wronged you or the people that you've wronged. It can be done all inside of your consciousness, and we're going to be talking about that today. Before we get into that, just standard disclaimers. I am a hypnotist and a life coach. Been doing this work for 16 years. Everything I talk about comes from my experience, my perspective of doing this kind of work. Obviously, if you have any significant or anything you're worried about in terms of physical, psychological issues, you want to consult your licensed practitioner, your psychologist, your doctor, or what have you. That's my standard disclaimer. If you have questions, please put those questions in the chat bar. That's what makes this so interesting. And it doesn't just have to be a question. It could be a comment. Adding to the conversation is what makes this so special as far as I'm concerned. So without further ado, let's get into this. So I say that there are three kinds of forgiveness. There is forgiving other people for what they've done to you. There's being forgiven for what you have done to them. And then the third is, in some respects, the most powerful of the three. This is my experience. And that is forgiving yourself for what you have done or what you have failed to do, or your perception of these things. Because sometimes we hold things against ourselves that isn't even reasonable to hold it against ourselves. I should have been there when such and such happened, or it's my fault because if I had said such and such, then maybe this wouldn't have happened. And people can be very, very hard on themselves. And I have found that oftentimes it requires one of the other kinds of forgivenesses, like in other words, being forgiven for something else that you've done, or forgiving someone else for something they've done to you, before you can unlock that door to forgiving yourself. And when that happens, all kinds of beautiful, magical things occur. I like to say that if you are in a state of non-forgiveness with another person, then you metaphorically are handcuffed to that person. And you know this is true because every time you think about that person, every time you think about how they wronged you, or perhaps how you wronged them, some kind of pain comes up. And that could come up in the form of anger. It could come up in the form of shame or regret or fear or worry, but some kind of pain. Even images of some incident that occurred, and that might have been 2 years ago, it might have been 20 or 30 years ago, come up in your mind. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that you are no longer handcuffed through pain to this other person. Whether you were the victim or whether you think that you might have been the perpetrator. We want to resolve that. And oftentimes people will say to me, well, the person that did this to me is dead. They're no longer living. Even if I wanted to forgive them, I couldn't. And this is what gets me into saying you don't have to be in the same room with a person in order to be forgiven by them or to forgive them. You don't have to call them on the telephone. It can all be done in your consciousness. And because of this, you don't need the cooperation in a human sense from this other person, because again, it's all happening in your consciousness. And whether you perceive in your philosophy that you can actually meet with another soul, another spirit, another person in your consciousness, or you just think, well, I know from Peter and from other people that my subconscious mind accepts everything as real. And so if I make a change in my subconscious mind, that's why I will feel better. It doesn't really matter which one of those points of view you take on, or if you take on both of them. The goal here is to heal your life. That's why I put that in the title. All right, so let's see who's here. Awesome. I love when you guys pop things into the chat bar. Sarah W., shout out to you. Glad you're here. Brenda Krieger, hello. Jane Kasinik. Oh yeah, definitely feeling better, Jane. Thank you for your well wishes. And then there's Gertie. Hello, Gertie. Welcome. Mama's Healthy Adventures. So good to see you here as always. Cookie Thieves. Hello to you, Cookie Thieves. Let's see. Okay, that's all we got for the people so far. And then there's Julianne. Hello, Julianne. Nice to see you again. Glad you're here too. So I talked about, can you forgive without the other person's cooperation? Let me explain how I think this operates. When we move into a state, and it's not the only state, we have other names for the state of a hypnotic trance, right? You could be doing psychedelic drugs. You could be having a dream while you're asleep. You could be meditating. You could be walking through the forest and all of a sudden you have some kind of a mystical experience. Well, when you move into that state, I'm just going to use hypnotic trance for obvious reasons, I believe that you are actually moving into the quantum field. So when we're walking around in our kind of day-to-day beta consciousness, that refers to a frequency at which the brain is oscillating. As that frequency slows down, we start to move into hypnotic trances. When we do this, I believe we enter what a quantum physicist would call the quantum field. Call it a frequency maybe, because I hate to think of a physical place, because I don't think it's a physical place. But it's the repository, if you will, of everything that has ever happened, everything that ever will happen, and all possibilities. And by entering into the quantum field and placing our focus on something and adding emotion to it, we essentially bring that possibility down onto this dense physical plane. In the quantum field, our non-physical being, whether you call that a soul or a spirit or something else, can interact with other individuals also in a non-physical, non-local state. And that's why that person doesn't have to be physically alive, physically in a body on this earth in order to engage in forgiveness. If the person is alive, and let's say you haven't talked to them, or they said, I'm never going to forgive you for such and such, it's still very likely that in your consciousness, their spirit will come, because it appears that the spirit isn't as deeply burdened with things like the ego as we are when we're in a physical body. And when you resolve something on that non-physical plane, call it the quantum field, what's truly remarkable is that you often will notice some kind of a change with that person on the physical plane, as if the puppeteer is up in the quantum field and the invisible strings come down and they're attached to our physical bodies. That if a change occurs in the quantum field, it seems to replicate itself on this physical plane. And some examples of this would be, I was working with a client, this was a number of years ago now, maybe 5 years ago. A blue collar, self-employed person, late 40s, always had a really bad relationship with his father. And we did this forgiveness work in hypnosis, in the quantum field. Spirit guides were present, and we affected the actual forgiveness act. Well, it gets really interesting when this client comes back for the next appointment, like the next week. And he says, you're not going to believe this, but the night of our appointment, I went over to my parents' house, had dinner with them. And the same as usual, my dad got up from dinner without saying a thing, went over, sat in his chair, turned on the television, started watching the television, and ignored us. So mom and I, like we always do, were just talking by the kitchen table. He said what was unbelievable to both he and his mom was that all of a sudden, it's like he muted the television. He turned around and he said to his son and his wife, I'm sorry I've always been such an asshole. Well, both of them had their like jaws drop and hit the kitchen table because he had never apologized to them for anything. Keep in mind, this is probably 2 hours after he's in my office, my client is in my office, going through this forgiveness process with his dad, so intense that this 48-year-old man or whatever he was weeping. And the father, 2 hours later, apologizes seemingly out of left field, never done this before, to his wife and to his son. And this is not the only time that I have had that experience, that I've had clients recount something like this to me. It has happened countless times. And the only way that I can explain it is that we have what Deepak Chopra would call this ability to transmit and receive information non-locally and without the aid of technology. And to me, this is like one of the most fascinating aspects of this work. And for me, it helps bring into sharp relief all of the things that I learned when I was in Sunday school as a little kid, why forgiveness was so important. I didn't really understand it. I was caught up in the righteousness of it. So we'll get into that in a second. I want to write that down here. Judgment and righteousness. Let's see if there are any questions. Okay. Just scrolling up here because I want to make sure I didn't miss anybody. Brenda Krieger says, I've been looking forward to this since you announced it last week. Awesome, Brenda. And if you have specific questions, that pertain to you and your life, feel free to pop them in the chat bar. Maybe you've already done that. She says, I'm unfortunately my own worst enemy. Let's see. Scrolling down. Andrea Sheehan, shout out to you. Glad you're here. I thought I was listening to a replay. That's funny. Cookie Thief said, I had my surgery back in October and I went to my doctor's appointment on Wednesday with my worker in London, Ontario, Canada, and my surgeon gynecologist said that my surgery was a success. Well, congratulations to you. I'm sure we are all happy for you. Here is Brenda Krieger says, do you have an opinion regarding DMT frequency? What is supposed to happen? So DMT stands for the active psychological ingredient in ayahuasca. And ayahuasca is a South American concoction where the shamans take like the bark of one tree and combine it with like a vine or something of another tree, stir it up, and then administer this to people. And when they have this administered to them, I believe they get very ill. They vomit, they throw up, but they shift their consciousness. They go on a psychedelic trip and they meet often Mother Ayahuasca is who the shamans call this being, this sort of loving being, and not with everybody, and not every time, but oftentimes, often enough that it's a real thing. People will have these major breakthroughs in their lives. They'll be able to see kind of the error, if you will, of their own ways and how certain aspects of them have created certain problems in their lives. It's like being able to step out of your own ego and look back at your life from a different perspective with clarity. And through that kind of process and through that clarity, people will be able to stop smoking sometimes, or they'll be able to stop being an alcoholic, or they'll realize they need to repair some kind of relationship, or they need to do further work on wounds that they're carrying around. And it's my contention that it's not the only way to do this kind of work, through psychedelic substances, that using hypnosis, you can actually do the same thing. I think some people can get there through meditation, especially if they do it a lot. Sometimes these things happen in dreams. With ayahuasca, with DMT, I don't have personal experience with that, although I will say that it is said that in the pineal gland, which is right between your eyes, the pineal gland looks like, it's very, very small, but it looks like a pine cone. And the pineal gland is said to be your third eye, so that when your eyes are closed and you can see something, that it's actually occurring in your third eye or in your pineal gland. And it is said that the pineal gland contains small amounts of DMT. And no one knows for sure, as far as I know, but it sounds like it is possible that through an inner spiritual practice, you might be able to release small amounts of DMT that could create a kind of opening or a portal into the quantum field, into the spiritual realm. It's fascinating stuff, I think. And we are obviously, as a global culture, or a Western culture, just starting to grapple with all of this. I think there are other cultures, like in South America, that understand this much better than we do. And one of the remarkable things about ayahuasca is how these shamans, hundreds of years ago, if not longer, knew to combine this bark of this tree with this vine of this plant and mix them together in this batch to come up with this. And what I would say is they went inside and they were told by Mother Ayahuasca. She told them how to do this. This is my theory about how the pyramids were built. I think Egyptian engineers went inside, or an Egyptian priest went inside and was shown how to do this. Questions were answered for them, and the essence, I would say, of my work with my clients is helping the clients tap into their own inner wisdom, call it what you will, to solve the problems that have heretofore been insoluble in their lives. All right, let's see who else we got here. So happy for you, Cookie Thieves. Way to go. And thanks for that question, Brenda. Oh, that's so cool. She saying she feels so much comfort just being part of the chat community. Absolutely. And this is one of the things I love about this, is the way people support each other. Scrolling down here. Here is Sajoka 2008, who says, it's important to forgive and heal. Otherwise, it will get to your physical body. Yes. That's why there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score. You don't want to get physically ill. Yeah, this is a really, really, really important point that's Sajoka, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, I'm probably hacking it up, is making. That our body, our mind, our emotions, and our spirit are all connected. And something that creates an emotional trauma, if it's not resolved, it can find its way into the cells of your body. And then it can almost like take on a life of its own and begin reproducing itself. You get a new body every 7 years. Your cells are constantly dying and being replaced. And it is said that every 7 years you have an entirely new body. Well, isn't it interesting that if you have a scar on your arm, that 7 years later, that 20 years later, the scar is still there? Well, why would that be? Well, there seems to be a memory, so that when the cells recreate themselves, they recreate themselves with that scar. And as an aside, and I hope I'm not going too far afield here, but I find this fascinating, that people with multiple personality disorders have been, it has been reported by clinicians for well over 100 years, that people with multiple personality disorders, when they move from one character, one Paul, into Stephen, they will go from having a tissue wound or a scar as Paul, and when they go into Stephen, that scar or tissue wound will disappear. And then when they go back to Paul, the scar reappears. There's a lot that we don't know. And energy and our thoughts and our emotions are immensely powerful. And so back to Sajoka, 2008, we want to make sure that we heal these emotional wounds. And I would say that, the sort of cornerstone of my practice is people come to me with symptoms. So they say, oh, that, they have these migraine headaches, and they get, 2 migraine headaches a week, or they get 2 a month, or they get 1 every day, or they get it every Thursday at 2 o'clock. These are all real things that people have reported. Or they have IBS, or they can't sleep, or they have nightmares all the time, or they never can find a good, happy, stable relationship. Well, these are all symptoms, and symptoms always trace back down to a root cause. A plant doesn't just exist on its own. Underneath the surface of the soil that you can't see, there's a whole root system. And if you want that plant to be gone, you have to deal with the root system. So what I find with client after client after client is with all of these issues, physical issue, emotional issue, and so on, patterns that have happened in their lifetime, that when we get down to the root cause, we find a trauma. And that trauma has an emotional component to it, and it has a mental component to it as well. It creates a kind of mental pattern or a groove that someone is more likely to stay inside of that pattern and have this thing keep repeating. Almost in some ways, like, if you had a scar, that some part of your blueprint of you is telling the body, reproduce that scar when it reproduces cells every 7 years. And when you heal that original trauma, the body is free of this. And people generally report feeling lighter, feeling less burdened. So Sajoka, 2008, great comment. Thank you so much. It added a lot to this broadcast. I really appreciate that. Here is Andrea Sheehan says, listening to this is causing my true love's energy coming at me. He did things that made me feel very brokenhearted, and I've been struggling with the forgiveness for years. Okay, so Andrea, if you would like to elaborate on this, then we can sort of, if you want, it's totally up to you, we can sort of go a little bit deeper into this and dissect it. And what we may find is we may find some kind of path forward, if you will. I'm not, obviously saying, well, we can just fix everything in 2 seconds without even talking to each other. But oftentimes when people share and go a little bit deeper into what they've been dealing with, we can get some light shed on this for you, but it's totally up to you. Here is Gertie, and Gertie says, hello, I know it's not about the subject, but I was wondering if you can make a hypnosis to not be afraid of losing weight. Yes, and I believe I have one on there right now, and it's called I Am Safe to Lose Weight. So what creates fear, generally speaking, in people around losing weight, and this is a big issue. Sometimes people realize they're afraid of losing weight, but most times people don't realize it. And the job of your subconscious mind is to protect you. And there's something about holding that weight that to the subconscious feels like it's safe. So go onto my YouTube channel, BlueSky Hypnosis, subscribe to anybody who hasn't already, and just search on my channel for safe to lose weight. And you'll find the tracks there that I think will help you. So thanks for the suggestion, and I could always make more in the future, but try that one, see what you think. And for anybody that is working with any of my tracks and you want to know what's on the subliminals, subliminal also means subaudible, you can just click on the video description where it says more, and it will have a list of what's on that track. And I think you'll see on the I'm Safe to Lose Weight, there's a lot of language around, for the subconscious, around it's okay subconscious, you're safe now, it's okay for her to lose weight. All right, thanks for that. Kitten in the Moon. I find I can forgive other people, but I'm incapable of forgiving myself. Even the petty stuff from when I was young and idiotic. It really impacts my self-care. I tell myself I'm not worth it. Okay, Kitten, thank you for that. What I would suggest is that you may, let's say as a child earlier in this life, you may have taken on a belief system about yourself when you were very young, and up until you're between the ages of 7 and 9, from 0 to 7 to 9, children are wide open. We say they're like sponges. And that's because there's no there's not a component called a critical factor or a critical faculty between your mind and the outside world. Everything just comes in. Hence that metaphor of children are sponges. They take in everything. And you may have taken on a belief from someone else about your worth. And that worth may have come from a belief that someone else may have put on you about guilt. That you don't do this. How come you're not better at that? How come you're not as good as your sister? How come you brought home a B instead of an A? It could have been something like that. It could have been something that you did as a young adult that you feel guilt and shame for. And you now have stepped into the role of the judge, of the jury, maybe even the executioner, and you're punishing yourself. The same thing could have happened in a past lifetime. And whatever it is, we would want to find out when that began. Did it begin earlier in this lifetime? Did it begin in a past lifetime? Because in order to solve a problem, we have to understand the contours and the structure of that problem. Once we have that, we can then essentially go back and rescue your younger self. Or if it's in a past lifetime, your earlier self. What happens when there's a trauma is that the mind fractures. And it's almost like this younger you or this earlier you gets frozen in time. And when you are triggered, you get your endocrine system floods you and you move into a fight or flight response. And it's like this earlier version of you, this younger version of you comes forward, the one who believes that you're no good. And she, I'm going to assume you're a she, but maybe you're a he. She is the one who needs to be healed. So our job is to find her and to understand why she was wounded in the first place. And once we understand that, we'll know exactly what we need to do to affect her healing. Is she feeling shame? Does she feel like she harmed someone else? That's probably likely. Did she take on this belief from a loved one or from a caregiver or something? If that's the case, then we want to essentially reverse the contract that she accepted all those years ago and have her step into a new place. And one of the things that I would say about forgiveness is that I have often sort of jokingly called myself a spiritual lawyer, because people, especially someone like you, Kitten, that maybe have held on to this belief for so long, you're not just going to go, oh yeah, totally, I forgive myself. Yeah, no problem. That makes sense. I'll just forgive no. It takes sometimes almost a negotiation where we have to almost present evidence to you in a hypnotic state for you to kind of weigh the difference between staying in this place of self-abnegation and low self-esteem and low self-worth and continuing on with this and believing you need to be punished, and its opposite, this kind of beautiful freedom where you are another human being just like the rest of us. You're one of God's children. You deserve to live a happy, joyful life just like everyone, that everyone makes mistakes. So you can't force someone, you can't force a horse to drink out of the water that you lead it to, and you can't force a person to accept forgiveness or to grant forgiveness. But what you can do, what you can't do with a horse, is like a lawyer, you can present evidence. You can bring forth witnesses, like the people that they think they harmed. And when they're forgiven by the people that they harmed, and when you ask a spirit guide in the presence of this person who will not forgive themselves, oh, who benefits by you being in a state of forgiveness? The answer is always, and this is what a good lawyer does, the answer is always, no one benefits. Oh, okay. Well, who would benefit by you forgiving yourself? Oh, well, your daughter would benefit. Yeah. And your husband would benefit. Okay, good. And your neighbors and pretty much anyone you come into contact with would benefit. And then you can say to the person, who are you to deny those benefits to these people that you love? And that person at that point, usually their ancient defenses crumble and they are willing to forgive themselves. And when they do, they feel so good. that they don't want to step out of that anymore. So it can be sort of tricky and complicated, but it can be done and done over and over and over and over again. All right, thank you for that, Kitten. Here is, Mama's Healthy Adventures. I have done the DMT and it's like you just receive information. Mine was all about the fact that I have remorse for my past mistakes so I can stop being so hard on myself and forgive myself for the past. Yeah, that's so beautiful. And that really adds a lot to this discussion about DMT, 100%. Thank you for sharing that with us. That's a classic example of how being able to step out of one's egoic self allows for the possibility of an expansion of the consciousness. And in that expanded consciousness, to see your own life, to see other people with much greater clarity. And I think that this is actually, we're coming up on that season, right? We're coming up on the Christmas season, and It's a Wonderful Life that old movie, 1946 or something, with Jimmy Stewart, is run around Christmas because the movie takes place around Christmas. And that whole movie is basically dedicated to the main character, George Bailey, having his perception of his life shifted, not by somebody telling him that he's being a fool or he's stupid or he's going to go to hell or something like that, but rather just allowing him to have the experience of what his world, the town of Bedford Falls, would have been like had he never existed. And kind of like Dickens's A Christmas Carol, Scrooge has his perspective, also Christmas, isn't that interesting? Also has his perspective shifted by the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future. They just show him a different perspective, and that different perspective causes him to want to change. That's the kind of work that we do in one-to-one sessions when we're plumbing the depths, finding the symptom, tracing it back down to the root cause, understanding what's going on, and then reversing it where it lives at that most fundamental level, and helping the client through the process to shift their own perspective and to let go of the pain. If they've been punishing themselves, to stop punishing themselves. If they've been handcuffed to other people because they refuse to forgive that other person, then helping to understand a greater perspective. This definitely gets into how you do this. Well, we have all, like a troupe of actors, we've all been the hero. We've all been the ingenue. We've all been the villain. We've all been the fool. We've all been the bit player. We've all done everything. And if you expand the frame large enough, in other words, if you expand the frame sometimes beyond this lifetime to other lifetimes, there have been times when you've done people wrong too. So have I. And when you can remember those instances through things like past life regression, it brings about a kind of humility, because you can ask an ascended master, or you can ask a client's spirit guide. And this is all happening through the client, by the way. It doesn't come through me. Did I ever harm someone in a similar way in a past lifetime? The answer is almost always yes. Okay, so let me go back and see it. So you go back and you see, oh my God, I'm doing the same thing to that person that they did to me in this lifetime, that another person did to me in this lifetime, or maybe even the same person. Was I ever forgiven for doing something heinous to someone else? The answer is almost always yes. So we go back and see what you did, then you were forgiven. Now, who are you not to forgive in this lifetime? And this ties back in, I said before, that all of these stories that I heard in Sunday school when I was 7, 8 years old suddenly became real doing this work. And I mentioned it last week, this parable of Jesus coming upon these men holding stones, and they're about to stone a prostitute to death for being a prostitute. And he says, let those among you without sin cast the first stone. It helps to bring in the humility that we're all human beings. We all make mistakes. We all suffer pain. And I'm not trying to excuse anything anyone has ever done to you, because I still think at the same time we have to hold people responsible. But I believe you can hold someone responsible and forgive them at the same time. And I feel like sometimes we have lost that perspective. And we have come to believe that if I forgive, Sebastian for what he did to me, then I'm in essence condoning what he did to me. And I don't believe that those two things are true. But I think if we have humility, if we have compassion, we can still hold people to account and simultaneously forgive them. And when we do, we release the handcuffs from us. We are no longer tethered to them through pain. And whatever that very low energy, that destructive energy was doing inside of us is now gone. And this is where people start saying things like, holy crap, I don't have the migraine headaches anymore. Oh my God, I don't have pain in my shoulder anymore. Oh my God, I used to argue with my husband, twice a day. And the last time the argument started, I just didn't feel like I had to engage in it anymore. And he had a confused look on his face and walked away. This is where the really big transformations occur. Alrighty. Thanks for that, mamas. Here is Bewusst Sein. Or Sein. Greetings from Germany. Glad to have you here. I carry around anger from many past lives. Anger, especially at men. It seems that I have been raped many times in my life. How can I forgive? Okay. So the first thing that we would want to know is, have you been experiencing karma? Are any of these horrific acts that have been perpetrated against you, are any of them about balancing karma? In other words, did you do anything in a much earlier lifetime for which you're paying a karmic debt? I'm not saying that that's the case, but it's one of the possibilities. Because at the root, we need to understand, we want to understand, why does this keep happening? Another possibility could be that your spiritual life lesson, and when you ask, say, a person's spirit guide or an ascended master that they're connected to, what is my spiritual lesson? You get answers like compassion, courage, speaking your voice, stepping into your truth or your power, and forgiveness. Well, then the next question you ask is, how many lifetimes? How many lifetimes have I been working on that lesson? You hear answers ranging from, well, this is the first lifetime you've been working on it, to more than 20, more than 30. Right? When you're dealing with someone who's very stubborn, when they've been dealing with the same lesson for, say, more than 5 lifetimes. Well, for the sake of argument, what if your lesson was as a soul or a spirit to learn how to forgive? And what if this is something that you really struggle with? And maybe these horrible things that have happened, and I'm not excusing anything because we're operating on a human plane, and as a human, I find this kind of thing absolutely abhorrent. I mean, really abhorrent. And simultaneously, I'm also a spirit. And as a spirit, I recognize that we can be in certain circumstances that sometimes are engineered at a higher level in order to help us learn whatever lesson we are here to learn, so that we don't have to come back here again. Once we've learned whatever we need to learn on this plane, we don't have to come back again. And I think for souls, for spirits, that's a big victory. So what if you were the kind of person that was very stubborn and even in this lifetime don't or aren't willing to forgive? it could be that from lifetime to lifetime, you keep getting put in this position because it would create the conditions whereby you would be more likely to learn that lesson of forgiveness. And I'm not saying this applies to you because I don't know you. And once you learn that lesson, there's no reason to have that experience anymore. So this is all hypothetical, of course, but it's all an example of how can we find out enough information about what's happened to you that we could then understand it better. What's the question that all of us human beings ask when something horrible happens? Why? Why me? That's what we ask. And that is the right question to ask. But we haven't been equipped with the tools, largely speaking, in our cultures in the West to go into our psyche, to go into our consciousness, to go into the quantum field, to go into past lifetimes, to go into spiritual contracts that we have, to really unpack this and understand and answer that question, why? That's what we need. We need to know why. Why has this happened over and over again in all of those lifetimes? Is this karma? Are you punishing yourself on a spiritual level? Does it have to do with trying to learn a particular spiritual lesson? What's the reason? There's always a reason. Nothing happens in a vacuum. So that's what we would need to find out. Because here's the thing, once you understand the why, let's just say for the sake of argument, it has to do with karma, that, in an even earlier lifetime you did something heinous. Wouldn't that make it easier to forgive the perpetrators? What if you could meet in a way that's safe for you in your consciousness? What if you could meet with those perpetrators who are now willing to ask for your forgiveness? And what if they came to you in your consciousness and they got on their knees and with tears in their eyes, they apologized for what they did? These are the things that answer your question about how can I forgive? To recap, it's to explore, to go where you need to go in your consciousness, so you can understand the 360-degree reasons and understanding and circumstances about what happened before you try to engage in the forgiveness act, where you, as part of that 360, you understand, did I have a hand in this, even in an earlier lifetime? And this is so not how we're wired as humans. So some of you know this, some of you don't, but I was a volunteer firefighter and an EMT for many years in Connecticut and in upstate New York. And one of the things that they teach about a structure fire, so you've got a building that's on fire, before you do anything, before you put water on it, before you go inside, before you attempt anything, you go around it. You do a 360-degree walk around, so you can understand the totality of what you're dealing with, because you may be walking into something that's going to kill you. And you don't have that awareness or understanding until you really look at the whole thing. But that's not our human instinct. Our human instinct is to rush right in and say, I got water, there's a fire, let me put it out. We need to do the same thing here. We need to take this step by step and really understand what's going on, because it's only by really understanding what's going on that we know how to intervene successfully. Hopefully that made sense to you. And thank you so much for sharing, Bivast. Here's Nancy Hoover, who says, yes, forgiveness is so important, not easy, yet healing. Oldest issues seem to be the toughest because the feelings can continue to rebound. Yep, I would agree with you there. And then Nancy continues on and says, if I keep trying repeatedly to forgive my parents that are no longer alive, holding them responsible for my pain and sadness, what else do I need to do? And she continues and says, I'm now thinking that maybe I'm really angry with myself for not realizing what I could have done. That's really admirable and impressive insight that you're demonstrating. Anger, I say, is a defensive response against the perception that something of value has been taken from you. And anytime I work with a client who is experiencing anger at another person, anger at themselves, anger at a situation, whatever it is, I always want to help them understand, and me understand too, what is it that you feel was taken from you? Because sometimes that thing that we believe was taken from us is itself an illusion. For example, we might feel that because a husband or a wife left us for someone else, that they took, say, self-respect with them, that they took that from us, or that they took love from us. And if that person then is able to feel love, again, in the consciousness, because we can do these things when the egoic mind moves out of the way, or they can feel deep, profound self-respect without another human being giving it to them, which personally I don't think happens. I don't think other human beings give us those things. I think they trigger those feelings. You know, a person looks at you in a certain way, they touch you in a certain way, they do a loving act for you, and you get these feelings of love flowing through your body. Well, they didn't just inject you with oxytocin and dopamine. They triggered something in your mind that said, oh, we're loved. We get to dump those chemicals and those hormones and those good feelings inside of us. And then we associate it with that person. And then when they go away, we think they took it with them. No, they didn't. So that's something that is important. The other thing, Nancy, that's important for you is to understand, did I choose one or both of these parents to be my parents before I was born in this lifetime? The answer is yes or no. And if the answer you find out is yes, that you chose one or both of them, it gets really interesting really fast, because why would your soul or your spirit choose these parents that you're so angry with to be your parents? Well, the answer is usually because being in that difficult circumstance, that challenging circumstance, that painful circumstance, would make it more likely that you would learn the lesson for which you're on this planet. So again, we're back to that concept of expanding the perspective. And if you want to, Nancy, you probably already know this, but other people may not. If you want to understand, how can I ask these questions? Well, you can go onto my YouTube channel, BlueSky Hypnosis, and you can just do a search on the channel. It's like a little magnifying glass, and just type in the word pendulum. A pendulum is an idiomotor tool that helps you to tap into your subconscious mind and understand what's going on there and ask yes or no questions from your subconscious mind. If you have any further questions about that, you can, set up a free 20-minute appointment with me through my website, BlueSky Hypnosis, or you can send me an email, peter@blueskyhypnosis.com, and I'll try to walk you through whatever questions you have about that, if you get stuck with something. All right, Nancy, thank you for that. Let's see where we are. Here is Andrea Sheehan. She says, wow, that gives me chills about the scars disappearing with multiple personality. Yeah, that's kind of amazing. And for those of you that may be tuned in later, clinicians have noticed for a long, long time, well over 100 years, that people with multiple personality disorders are known to have things like tissue wounds, and scars appear and reappear as they go in and out of different personalities. To be left-handed and right-handed, to be really good at this or really good at that. It's amazing, what that tantalizing fact kind of opens up about possibilities in our mind, about what we are really capable of. And it gets me thinking about the movie The Matrix. When Neo and the other characters were in the Matrix, they could do these superhuman things. Different rules applied to them. And what's going on in our mind, and how does it affect our body? This is really like this almost unexplored territory, or we've just been kind of dabbling around the edges of this sort of mind-body healing. Alrighty. See if there's any other questions here. Brenda Krieger says, I really don't like New Year's. It's a very depressing holiday for me. I don't go to parties. A New Year changes nothing. Anything I can do to feel better about this? Thank you. Yeah. If I were you, I would use a pendulum. And once you calibrated the pendulum, in other words, you now know which movement is yes, no, and maybe, and that this is a good time to ask questions and receive accurate answers, I would ask a few questions. Number one, I would ask, do you have any spiritual entities attached to you and or to your being? I have a video I made about 3 months ago on removing spiritual entities that also teaches you how to use a pendulum. If you have spiritual entities attached to you, you may be in a way subjected to what I would call an energetic parasite. And that energetic parasite, or plural energetic parasites, may somehow be involved with us. You may be suffering from, in essence, these things that are holding on to you. So I would check that out. If that's a no, I would then check out, did I suffer a trauma on New Year's Day at any point in the past, including past lifetimes? If you got a yes to that, then that clearly would be the reason, I would say, why you have this feeling about New Year's. If it's not that, I would ask, do I have a pessimistic belief about the new year? Sounds like you do. Was that created earlier in my present life? Yes or no? If it's yes, figure out, was it created before I was 15 years old or after I was 15 years old? And see if you can zero in on when it was created. If it's a no, ask if it was created in a past lifetime. You're going to get a yes to that if it's a no for your present life. And then keep drilling down to find out the circumstances. Did I take on this belief that nothing changes from someone else? Maybe it was your way of bonding with your mother, for example, when you were a little girl. Maybe she was pessimistic about the new year, that nothing ever changes. And to bond with her, you took on this belief. It's going to be something. And the key is to get to the root cause, right? You know, if you have a hole in your roof, yes, you can put a bucket underneath it. You can get a mop. You know, you can keep cleaning your carpet. You can do things, but it's not going to solve the systemic problem that keeps creating this issue for you until you, I got a hole in the roof. I need to patch that. I need to cover that up. And then I don't have to keep doing these cleanup operations. And so for you, you know, someone could say, well, you should program yourself with positive affirmations, positive hypnosis, self-hypnosis, and so on. Reframe things for yourself. Will that help? Yes. Just like mopping up the mess helps. But you have to get to the root cause. That's what I believe. So hopefully some of these ideas and perspectives have helped you in some way. And if you have any other questions about it, just feel free to pop it in there. And if I can answer it, I will do that. Before I move on, I just want to make sure I've kind of covered everything that I said I was gonna cover. And I think I have done that. And I also want to talk about next week. So where did I put that? Where I said next, of course. There we go. So next week we're going to be focusing on past life regression. And I have found that people in general are fascinated by this topic and that they generally have lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of questions about it, especially when other people are asking questions, because it sparks their mind, it sparks their curiosity. And I want to be able to walk through past life regression, answering questions that people have. You know, is it safe? What can I use it for? Will I get stuck in a past lifetime? How many past lifetimes have I had? What if I find a past lifetime where I was a real heinous person? What if I was an SS guard at a concentration camp in World War II? There's a lot of people that are afraid of that. How can I use a past lifetime to resolve issues in my present lifetime? We'll cover all of that and anywhere you guys take us. So that's what we're going to be talking about next Friday. I hope you will consider joining. All right, let's take a couple more questions here. And I hope, Brenda, again, that thing about New Year helped you. Let's see, here's Andrea Sheehan, who says, since I was young, I used to say I had one true love I came here for. I met him when I was young, but I rejected him. Then in 2018, I connected with him again, and he professed his love for me. He said he's getting divorced, and then he ghosted me. She goes on to say, there's some more to it than that, but that's basically it. He said it was too hard and abandoned me and said I should just move on with my life. Okay, so first of all, that sounds like a really painful experience. And I'm sorry, as a fellow human, that you had that experience, that you had to go through that. And I just want you did say that you rejected him earlier, and so now it sounds like he's rejecting you. I guess I would want to know, if we were working together, what is your greater relationship with him? What is the larger relationship with him? In other words, is he in your soul group? Have you ever abandoned each other before this lifetime? Do you have a spiritual contract together? Does that spiritual contract, if you have one with him, does it need to change? Are there agreements or clauses that you made in a past lifetime, for example, that need to change? What is going on under the surface? What is the information we don't yet have? Do you have a karmic relationship with him? Have you ever been in a relationship with him before in another lifetime? These are all things we would want to know. And chances are that this is not your first rodeo with him. Chances are that abandonment has been a function that appeared in other lifetimes. And by exploring, if that's true, by exploring the instance or the instances of abandonment in other lifetimes, we can heal those instances. We can rewrite, a spiritual contract that you may have with him if it's no longer in your highest and best interests. We can have you, in your consciousness, if you feel this way, apologize, atone for rejecting him earlier in this life, and maybe explain to him why you did it. And as I said to you before, I often will see some kind of shift in this, in the present moment, based upon this work that's happening in your consciousness. And it may be that you're able to release him when you do this work, and release him and feel really good about it, and freely let him go. It may be that he floats back into your life. But the larger point is understanding the greater context in this relationship between the two of you. And by understanding that greater context, doing our 360 around the burning building, we know what kind of work we have to do, what kinds of things we have to resolve inside of you. We can't control him, but we can clean up your side of the street, if you will. And just by cleaning up your side of the street, sometimes that dramatically affects relationships, because I say relationships conform to the laws of physics. Namely, every action causes an equal and opposite reaction. In other words, as you change, all the people in your life are affected by your change. Whether you change for what we would say is the better, or we would say it was a change for the worse. Other people are going to be affected by this change. It's like throwing a stone into a still pond. The ripples go in all directions. And that could be a stone of pain, or it could be a stone of healing. It's going to affect everybody. So hopefully that makes sense. All right, let us see here. I'm just going to scroll way down and see if there's anyone that I haven't popped up here yet. You guys asked a lot of great questions today. Here is Julianne, and Julianne says, sometimes I wonder if it's just like that those of us who suffer such horrific crimes in this life have simply chosen to take on more work in this life. And then she says, then I wonder if sometimes we are incredibly, almost maybe overzealous in the spirit world before we incarnate, almost like a spiritual workaholic, if we sort of collapse without forgiving others. That is, I think, so profound. So profound. And yes, even as humans, let's just say, when we're in love and we're, euphoric and we're walking on air and we just have to be in the presence of our beloved, and we plan a wedding and we have all of our friends and family there, and we choose all the details down to the little centerpiece on everyone's table and the food and all these things, and we're just flying high. What are we doing? We're taking on, usually, at least the intention is, we're taking on a lifetime commitment to another human being. We may throw mortgages, we may throw chronic diseases, we may throw financial hardship, we may throw children, and a host of other things into the mix. What are we taking on when we take on, and I'm not trying to dissuade people from getting married. I've been married for 26 years. But what are we really taking on in that state of euphoria when we make this promise to another human being? I think you're exactly right. I think in the spirit world, we are in that state of euphoria. We have a much greater perspective of all the lifetimes we've led and our purpose on the planet. We're not feeling pain at that moment. We're not struggling with something. And we feel like, I can do this. So yeah, a spiritual workaholic, you called it. I think that's really, really interesting. You talked about being overzealous. I think our nature is one of zeal, is one of optimism, is one of great hope. And I think sometimes we get beaten down in this lifetime as a human being. And a lot of that stuff starts to get knocked out of us. But I do think that we in that state, which is our true state, that is our true home, we are immensely powerful. And I think the answer is to step back into that awareness, to heal the things that have beaten us down in this life, so that we can rise up into our true potential, so that we can accomplish our mission for what we came here to accomplish in the first place, rather than reducing what we take on the other side. Does that make sense? And I'm speaking in general terms, because I do think sometimes souls can take on too much. But I like to think more in terms of let me find my power again in this life by healing my past and by remembering who I really am. Because in that state, I can accomplish what I came here to do. I really didn't take it on willy-nilly. I mean, I was maybe in a euphoric state and I had a greater awareness, but I was being counseled with all of this. And I wouldn't have taken it on if I didn't believe, and if others didn't believe, that I was capable of achieving my goal or my purpose for this life. So, fabulous comment. Along with everyone else who commented today, I sincerely appreciate your zeal, your interest, your enthusiasm, showing up, participating, asking questions, making comments, especially supporting each other. And I sincerely hope that you guys will consider coming back next Friday live at 5 for our segment on past life regression. Bring your questions with you. If you have questions ahead of time and you want to email them to Peter@BlueSky Hypnosis, feel free to do that. That gives me some time to think about it. I can then, pop it up, whatever question you may have, or an experience that you had that pertains to past life regression, and we'll tackle this. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend wherever you are, including in Germany and other places around the world. And I guess that's it. Thanks again for participating. We'll see you next Friday live at 5 for our segment, our broadcast on past life regression. Take care. Goodbye.